I was digging in the graveyard when, to my surprise, I saw a gruff-looking ghoul with hollowed-out eyes. I asked him who he was and where he's been, where he replied, "I ain't dead, I'm Brian Keene." He's Brian King. He's a writing machine. He's Brian Keene. A publishing fiend. Oh, whatever happened to the king of the horror scene with Mary Giovanni, the queen of the scene? That's as far as I got. Hey, everybody. My name is Clay McLeod Chapman. Happy New Year. It is 2025, and we are off and rolling with fearmongers. Every December, it's like, I'm not going to do this again for another year. Like, we can't do it for another year. But then the fine, lovely, and kind, considerate folks at the Westport Library say, like, are we going to do this again? And it is really hard to say no, especially when you get guests like ours tonight. Our
Oh,
very, very first guest for 2025 is none other than Brian Keene. And there's no way to introduce you that is going to ever do you justice.
I think you did with that song. So Clay, I've been on CNN, I've been on the Howard Stern show. I don't think I've ever had as an effusive introduction as what we just experienced there.
I mean, Howard Stern doesn't sing for you. He doesn't. He's not going to serenade you. I think that is very clear. Like, you don't have to say I'm your favorite, but we know.
You're my
We know.
favorite. You're
Sorry,
my
Howard. Um, but I mean, I mean, like, I'm failing already at the beginning of this because, like, I can't even come up with an official tally of the amount of books
I
you've
mean,
written.
you can't see it because my webcam's not going to rotate, but official tally is somewhere, I think it's 55, 56 books if we're
Oh
counting short story
my
collections.
Lord.
I used to joke that Richard Lehman, of course, was one of my mentors, and my joke always was I wanted to do one more book than him, and I did. So now my new one is I want to do one more than F. Paul Wilson.
Oh
Um,
God. So you're just working your way up through.
yeah, exactly,
Uh,
exactly.
well, I mean, that's a really interesting kind of point you make because, like, I feel like straight out of the gates, I kind of want to ask, what stories are left to tell for you? Like, what at this point is like? Do you say you wake up and you're like, I have to tell this story, and what is it? Where does it come from at this point?
That never goes dry.
Okay.
I think my tastes change. I think as I get older, I do a lot less splatterpunk and extreme horror. I'm doing a lot more of what they call quiet horror and
Yeah.
surrealism these days. Not quite bizarro, but surrealism. Um, but the stories never stop. You know,
Yeah.
I today I woke up at 7 o'clock. I've been writing all day, in addition to answering emails and all the things that don't actually constitute writing. And my only break was to take a walk through the woods. And in that time, I got six different story ideas. Um, the struggle is finding the time to write them. Because as you get older, you do slow down. It's a strange dichotomy. You have more free time to write, but you write less because it's just not physically possible to keep up that pace you used to keep up. Uh,
But I was being cheeky before we started, but I do feel like there you get zero sympathy from me because I see you as not only creating a life of writing, but you've kind of created a kind of culture of writing around you. And I'm thinking specifically of things such as, Vortex books and comics. I'm thinking of, Scares That Care, which I all want to kind of touch upon. You you strike me as someone who, when the idea hits, it's it's the follow through of like, I want to do this, let's make it happen. Like, I want to have a bookstore. Let's make it happen.
yeah,
Do you like, is there anyone who says no to you? Like, is there ever like, that's not a great idea, Brian. Like, let's not do that yet.
Clay, people have said that to me my entire life.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're right. Like when my mother told me if I didn't quit jumping my BMX bike over things like Evil Knievel, I was going to get really hurt. She was right. Um, but yeah, people have told me no my entire career. Um, but if I can say this without sounding arrogant, I trust myself. I trust my instincts. When my gut tells me I can do something, I do it. I haven't succeeded at everything I've tried. I've certainly had my failures in this
Yeah.
industry. But my wife, author Mary San Giovanni, who you name checked there at the introduction, she equates it with mountains. She tells our friends Brian finds a new mountain to climb and he has to climb it and he won't stop until he reaches the top and then he gets bored with it and looks for the next mountain. Um, and yeah, I guess if you look back over the 30 years I've been doing this professionally, there is some of that. I wanted a mass market paperback career and I got that. And then I wanted the bestseller list and I got that. And then, I wanted movies and I got that. I'm always setting myself a new goal. Um,
But it's
the
the
goals,
guts.
the goals these days though are sort of they're twofold. They're self-preservation and legacy. Self-preservation, like let's take Vortex for example.
Mhm.
I look at the writers who are older than me. And these people are gods to me. I mean, these are people I was reading as a teenager, as a kid, as a young adult. They are who inspired me to do this. And in many cases, they're if they're not living at poverty wages, they don't have a lot of savings. They don't have a lot of retirement. Um, and I told Mary, we're in our 50s now. We have to plan better. We have to plan ahead. Uh, so the bookstore was a way of doing that. And some people may laugh and say, well, a bookstore is no more reliable than writing for a living. But I gotta tell you, folks, you know, it, you put the two together and it's a pretty reliable, steady income. And you can start building a retirement on it. The other thing I mentioned is legacy. I don't want to just be known for as the guy who revitalized zombies. I mean, okay, yeah, credit where it's due. Me and Robert Kirkman and Danny Boyle did that. I've accepted that. I don't get embarrassed when people point it out anymore. But there's got to be something more than that. I have been helped and assisted by some of the greats: Joe Lansdale, Paul Wilson, Dick Lehman, Jack Ketchum, Stephen King, Dean Koontz early on. Everybody's always been so gracious and helpful, and I've tried to pay that forward. And I think that's a legacy of something like that is far more important than, he wrote Kick-Ass Zombies. Uh,
Yeah.
that's why I love being involved with Scares That Care. When
Yeah.
when the founder, Joe Ripple, asked me to get involved, I jumped on it because that's something when I'm gone, my kids can look at and say, they can say, yeah, Dad wrote all these books, but look what he did over here with this charity,
Yeah.
you know?
I find that a lot of the folks that tend to listen to this are writers themselves, and are kind of early in their careers. So when I think of us mere mortals looking up at that mountain, Brian Keene says, "I'm going to climb it. I'm going to scale it until I find a bigger mountain." That instinct, that kind of like trusting your gut, like I feel like that's something that has to be learned. Because I personally like I have a hard time trusting my guts. I always feel like my guts are all kind of like twisted and twined to the extent where like I don't know what is the kind of natural kind of like this is the inclination, like go this way, do this.
Right.
So I guess I want you to kind of go into the kind of mental time machine and kind of, can you pinpoint that moment where you're honing your instincts, where you're kind of like learning that, like, this is like, if you're the kind of evil Knievel of horror lit, like having that added risk, that kind of like that inherent kind of like challenge of doing something that isn't safe. How do you learn that? How do you find that kind of internal voice that says, jump, jump, Brian, jump?
It's funny that you use that phrase jump because honestly, and this sounds like I'm playing around, but I'm not. I credit David Lee Roth and Van Halen. Um, you know, I look back at my influences as a child, and it was Burt Reynolds and Smokey and the Bandit. It was Han Solo, his first appearance, and it was David Lee Roth. There was nobody on the planet that was cooler to me than David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
Um, and if you've ever read his memoir, he's actually a very shy, very introverted person. He probably has social anxiety. I am all of those things, but you would never friggin' know it when you see me in public. I flip the switch, I turn it on, and I jump.
Yeah.
Um, I will do anything for attention. As a horror writer, it's my hope I'll scare you. If I can make you feel something, that's great. If I can't make you feel something, if I can at least get you to laugh and keep you entertained, then I'm okay with that too. Um, and that's where it comes from. It's this need, it's this desperate need to, hey, look at me, I'm going to do this now. This is crazy, right? Are you entertained? Um, I trust my gut in those situations. I don't trust my gut when it comes to relationships or financial investing or things
Yeah.
like my gut's an idiot when
Yeah.
it comes to these things. But when it comes to business and when it comes to writing, I trust it. My first novel was a zombie novel, and I wrote it at a time when zombies were dead. Nobody was doing them, and everybody said, "Well, it's crazy to write a zombie novel. Nobody does zombies anymore." But my gut told me this is what I want to read. I bet other people are going to want to read it as well.
Yeah.
You know,
It's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, we're talking about The Rising here, and as of this recording, we're recording this on Monday, January 27th, which means tomorrow, on January 28th, you'll be releasing The Rising, which is a collection of short stories subtitled More Selected Scenes from the End of the World.
yep.
If you're talking about legacy, I mean, I also think that like what you've done is carve out worlds where it's not just one novel, but it's like a series of novels or series of stories that kind of exist or cohabitate within these literary epochs that you've kind of forged. And The Rising being your kind of your first novel to now here is a collection of short stories, several years later, like you're re-entering into this epoch that you've created. And I'm just really curious, like, how is it to return to the well?
It was funny. This collection, I never had plans to do this. I have plans to write a final novel in the Rising series, and in fact, I've been working on it for a couple of years. It's called The Fall. When I'm done, it'll be about the size of The Stand or Robert R. McCammon's Swan Song. It's a big old phone book of a novel because I've always wanted to do one of those. That was a mountain I had yet to climb, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but this collection came about. Author Christopher Triana. Um, he had a dog named Bear, and Bear was a mainstay at conventions and signings. She was always with him. Well, she got cancer, and Chris was trying to come up with the money to for her vet bills and stuff. And I said, I got you covered. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to let people commission personal stories set in the world of the Rising, and we'll raise this money in 24 hours. And we did. Um, so I put the stories together and I was like, there's enough here for a thin book. Um, and then Dead Sky got involved. They wanted to publish it. And then Charlie Benante, drummer for Anthrax and more recently Pantera, got involved. He wanted to illustrate it. And yeah, here's an accidental book that was started just to help Chris's dog, you know. But it's always fun to return to that setting because every time I think there's no more stories to be told there, I find out that I'm wrong.
Yeah. And is that you taking that walk outside, collecting six ideas, and then bringing them back to then find the time to write them, or is
Yep.
it
Yep. No,
you're
it's absolutely that. And in the case of the stories in this book, one of the fun things is, you have real people commissioning these stories. They want to star in the story. And I talk to them and I learn about their lives and learn about who they are. And there's always little gems there that suggest themselves to me as well.
Mhm.
So,
And with this collection coming out, the stories kind of remain, were they actually published elsewhere, or did they kind of just exist for
nope.
the
I
people
I
who commissioned them?
I wrote each one, printed out the manuscript, signed it, mailed the original manuscript off to them, and then, obtained their permission to collect the stories and print them in book form.
So this will be the first time that these stories will be out in the open.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Um, I, you're, I'm gonna sing your praises because I do feel as if your benevolence towards the community, the writing community, the horror community, the horror reading community. Um, I I feel as if someone has an issue, or if someone is kind of going through something, uh, and you catch wind of it, you take it on yourself as a personal problem that needs to be remedied, and you find a solution that ends up being not only to the benefit of the person who might have been the kind of person at the beginning of the process, but the kind of larger community. And I do think that, like you mentioned, Scares That Care as this kind of flagship legacy kind of moment for you. And I want to ask you, like, can you speak to us, tell us what Scares That Care is, who started it with, tell us about Joe and what your relationship is with it now.
Yeah, sure. It was founded by Joe Ripple. He was a retired homicide detective, and a big horror fan. He made little indie horror films on the side. And he burned out on being a cop. He wanted to do something different. A friend of his uh, lost a child to cancer, and Joe was like, you know what, I'm going to start a charity, and we're gonna we're gonna help these people because he saw how financially devastating something like that is. And he built a team, and everyone on the team is either a horror fan or a horror professional, and it was a way to show the outside world that we're not all Jeffrey Dahmer,
Mhm.
that we're normal people and we can also help and do good things. The charity has been around 18, almost 20 years now. I've been involved with it for, I think, 14 years. Um, we've almost raised at this point $1 million. In fact, by the end of this year, it should be well over, if not well over, then at $1 million. Um, maybe my figures are wrong on that, but we're getting there. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a substantial amount of money we've raised. Every year, it's at least three families: a family with a sick child, uh, someone fighting breast cancer, and a burn victim. Um, but we do more than that. A lot of times, if someone in our community, like Elizabeth Massey when she was fighting cancer, Laird Barron when he was ill, if we can help in those cases, we do. There are families who lose everything right around Christmas time who will step in and help. So it's not just those three families every year that we help. There's a lot of other people as well.
Mhm.
Um,
And the kind of offshoot of Scares That Care is AuthorCon.
right.
And how many years has that been? It's been
This will be year 5 for AuthorCon.
year 5. I mean, it is it's pretty awe-inspiring to think of, like, in the scope of what has happened in the course of those 4 to 5 years.
Well, and it's funny. AuthorCon was one of those mountains where everybody told me it wouldn't work. Um, including I love all my board members. It scares the care, but they didn't think it was going to work either. Um,
Wow.
I knew it would. And when I was first starting in this industry, there used to be an event called World Horror Convention, and I miss it terribly. It sort of got gutted and its knees cut out from under it when the HWA began StokerCon. Um, and I knew if I could bring something like that back for your generation of writers, you guys would love it. And I went to Scares of Care and the rest of the board, and I said, "Look, I want to try this author-centric convention." And they didn't. I mean, they believed in me and they believed in the idea, but they weren't expecting it to be financially viable for the charity. Um, and we proved them wrong the first year.
I mean, it's essentially it's Evil Knievel saying, "Hey guys, get in this bus. I'm gonna drive you over the cliff onto this other mountain over there, and it's gonna be amazing."
You're gonna love it.
It like there's a certain level of faith that is kind of inherent to these risks that you're taking, where it's like it's not just one person. Like there's a team of people at Scares That Care that
Oh
like
yeah,
they dedicate you know, there's the weekend of AuthorCon, but I'm imagining this just all of the kind of time and manpower that it takes to get to the weekend that is AuthorCon.
right.
And it is exhausting, but it is now busting at the seams. Like you could not cram any more authors into that con because it would be author con or other authors con. And I feel like you built it. They have come and it is interesting to see how as this community kind of grows and is essentially kind of navigating you know just the year like I find that AuthorCon ends up being one of these kind of pivotal moments where it's a lot of familiar faces, a lot of people who not only will like want to participate and kind of like sell books or buy books, but it is this kind of like vital moment within the horror community as either an author or as a reader. And I don't know, I don't think I'm alone in this. I don't think I'm saying something that is novel here. Like I think people really come to see this as like the kind of like the beginning of their year, whether they go to anywhere else.
I mean, I hope they do. And what's beautiful about it is, they're making friendships that will last.
Hmm.
They're making, if they're an author, they're getting advice or feedback or business connections that will last. If they're a reader and a fan, they're meeting their favorite. I mean, I've watched people just completely lose their mind when they meet you and you sign their books at AuthorCon. But what's most beautiful about it is all of that money that's raised goes to charity.
Yeah.
Scares the Care is a nonprofit, and we're all volunteers. And you're right, there are months and months of pre-planning and work that go into that weekend. And we're not getting paid for that. That's volunteer work. So it's amazing to see how lucrative it's become and how powerful it's become
Yeah.
and what a force for good it has become.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. And what you just mentioned kind of made me realize there is something to be said about the horror reading community and how, for the majority of our life, our year, it ends up being digital. Like we all kind of exist in this social media sphere where an event like AuthorCon uh, makes it real. We're in person. You're kind of talking to people, meeting people. Like there's like the actual kind of physical presence of it is really palpable. It's very powerful. Um, and I think that like people have come to depend on that and having that ability to kind of like see people and actually converse with people. It's a relief because I think like for the most part, over the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, we've kind of receded into these kind of digital spheres,
We have.
which makes having a spot like AuthorCon all the more necessary.
Yep.
And you're mentioning legacy, and you kind of you said my generation, and my generation's already kind of like we're pulling out our screens and kind of tweeting about these things. I I I I I feel like it's a rare opportunity where I get to address my elders. and and I mean, but you've taken on a certain kind of mentorship role for I mean, I was going to say hundreds. I mean, at least dozens upon dozens of authors kind of look to you as someone who they can either seek out guidance, either by asking a question or sharing a manuscript or you read this. Um, I mean, I think that like what I want to ask is we're at the beginning of a new year. It is 2025. Horror at the moment seems to be having a moment. And as much as we all have these crystal balls, I'm curious if you could look into yours and kind
Oh,
of
absolutely.
what's
Um,
what's the future hold for us youngins?
you're not going to like the answer.
Mm.
Um, Let me start with this caveat. I will never be as knowledgeable about our genre's history as Carl Edward Wagner was, or S.T. Yoshi, or my dear departed friend J.F. Gonzalez. Jesus forgot more about horror history than I will ever know. But I think I've got some chops in that regard. Um, Horror fiction, its popularity waxes and wanes. It runs in cycles. I have lived through what they've referred to as the horror crash. I've lived through two of them. There was the one in the 90s when I was a fan and a reader and trying to become a writer. And right as I started trying to submit, horror collapsed. We saw the death of Zebra Books. We saw the death of Delibis. Uh, at that point, it went underground, and we saw what became the small press really rise up. Cemetery Dance came to prominence, Necro Publications, Subterranean Press, all these others. With the advent of leisure books, horror had another moment, and it was bigger than it had ever been before. It was big enough that the New York Times decided that new authors such as myself and Jesus and Tim Levin and Jemiah Jefferson warranted a four-page spread in the Sunday section about the rebirth of horror and how it was bigger than ever. Um, it died again, uh, and it will happen again soon. What happens is this. Um, Horror gets really, really popular. So all the publishers are looking to publish more horror, and all these authors begin writing horror. But the audience for horror remains the same. If you have, let's say, 70,000 people buying horror novels and they have a set amount of income to spend on those novels, and the amount of choices they're being given just keeps growing and growing and growing, your market contracts. Um, we're heading into that. And we're not going to get political tonight, but these tariffs, these proposed tariffs, are going to have a huge impact on people's income. Uh, when people don't have money, the first thing they stop spending on is entertainment, and books are entertainment. Um, I think it will probably hit the indie horror market harder this time than it will mass market and mainstream publishing. I think the folks there are going to be fine. Um, but I think hard times are coming for the indies, and
And is that because of production costs or because of
production costs and the fact that there's too much stuff being published right now.
Mhm.
Um, because everybody's trying to strike gold. They're striking while it's hot. Uh, but it's not doom and gloom. Okay. The two things I want to impress on you folks that are listening. I've gone through this twice. Okay. It comes back again. When the leisure books collapse happened, it took the entire mid list with it. Um, you used to be able to buy horror at the grocery store, at Walmart, etc. all that stuff is now published as indie. Um, but when that happened, and it happened very fast, I lost 90% of my income in a month. My annual income in a month's time was wiped out. Um, what I learned from that was never put all your eggs in one basket. And what I mean by that is if you can build your career to where you've got a novel being published with a mainstream press and a novel being published with a small press, and maybe you're doing something on of your own, self-published on KDP. If you can do that, you'll survive. You're going to be fine. You really are going to be fine. It's the folks that just say, okay, I'm doing everything with this publisher that stand to lose the most. Because if that publisher goes down, they've lost everything. They don't have another outlet or another venue to go to. So that's the one thing I would keep in mind. And the other thing I would keep in mind is that, you know, horror fiction as a genre label, it's a trend. Okay, sometimes science fiction's really popular, sometimes it's not. Sometimes horror is really popular, sometimes it's not. Right now, romantasy is hugely popular. There will come a time when it's not. Um, and there's nothing you can do to control that. There's nothing you can do to change it. All you can do is just anticipate it, be ready for it, and write through it. If you're just starting as a writer now, it's a perfect time. When the horror collapsed in the 90s, I was just starting as a writer. So I spent my time writing a zombie novel that everyone told me nobody would want to read. Guess what? When horror started to come back, people wanted to read that zombie novel. Um, you
Are
just,
you kind of aware of the cycle when you're in the cycle? Do you is it, having kind of survived two of these crashes, do you say to yourself like, "Oh, we're at the 11th hour. Like this
yeah,
feels like,
yep, it's
yeah,
exactly like that.
yeah."
It's exactly like that. And you know what? I'd love for this to be one of those times that I'm wrong, and maybe I will be. My gut tells me I'm not. Um, I don't think it's going to happen soon. I don't think it's going to be tomorrow. I think we have a great year ahead of us, a really exciting year. Um, but I do think probably by 2026, we'll see the market begin to contract a little bit.
I am terrified. I'm terrified. It's a scary thought. But yeah, I mean, it nothing feels certain. And I think what has also been kind of discombobulating about, like, let's say the last few months, is that there have been certain kind of heroes, authors, that we really have looked up to and kind of aspired to. And, through journalism, through kind of like, things that might have been known or not known, like we're kind of aware of certain kind of sacred cows being exposed for, having kind of darker inner lives.
Right.
And I mean, it's scary because it's like we've it's not even that we're putting our eggs in one basket, but like these things that we've kind of held on to and kind of hold near and dear. We're being kind of challenged of like, can you hold on to that? Can you still read Harry Potter? Can you still, all of these things feel uncertain or rocky. And I think I want to kind of ask a question, and I don't know the kind of the way to ask it. So you're going to have to humor me and forgive me. But I think a lot of the horror community, again, and both from a reader and a writer perspective, um, there tends to be either bad eggs or, you know, a certain kind of like element that a corrosive element to the community. Um, and I feel as if you have been either put into a position or you've kind of like stepped into a position along with folks like I think Christopher Golden, Gabino Iglesias, um, who kind of in these kind of roles as either mentors or certain kind of like stable kind of like we're we're here in the stormy waters. Like, this is the lighthouse. Um, I'm really trying hard not to say the word gatekeeper because I feel like gatekeeper has a kind of like a tough connotation to it.
Right.
Um, so if I had my internal thesaurus working, I would say something
How
other
about
than
den mothers?
den mothers. There you go.
There you go.
Um, you know, you, I see you as being kind of a den mother by proxy, uh, particularly I think on social media. But I have to imagine that that kind of bleeds out into the real world as well. Um, when when did this happen? Like, how did this happen?
I Part of it is the law of attrition. So many of the people that I started with, that I came up with, are no longer with us. Um, so part of it is, if you're one of the last people standing, it falls on you. Um, Look, I love the horror genre. I always have. I've been reading this stuff since I was 8 years old. Um, if tomorrow they came to me and said, "We're taking all of your awards and none of your books matter anymore. Get out, old man." That's okay. I'll still love horror and I'll still be reading it. Um, and I've got 30 years of experience to be able to look back and remember what it used to be like. I remember what it was like for Jesus and Wrath James White and Maurice Broaddus and Linda Addison to come into this as people of color. Um, because they were it. That was it, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I remember all too well what it was like for folks like Mary and Sarah Langan and Sephora Duran and Sarah Pinborough and others as women and the bullshit they had to put up with. You know, I remember what it was like to to be a member of the LGBTQIA community in this industry, and how you would get pigeonholed and you would get treated. And I know I know folks get frustrated and there are still bad actors. But if you could see back over the last 30 years, it is better. It gets better in increments.
Mhm.
And I'm not speaking for Chris, but I kind of am because Chris is one of my best friends. He's been doing this as long as I have, and he sees it the same way. It's like, all right, whether we intend to do it or not, we've helped move it in this direction. We got to keep pushing, you know.
Mhm.
And I won't lie to you, Clay. There are many days where I hate having to be one of the people that does that. It happened today. Um, I would much rather just be left the hell alone so I can sit and write stories, about zombies and giant worms and all kinds of other nonsense. Um, in an ideal world, it could just be Gabino and the other youngins. We'll send them out to do it, and Chris and I could sit back. But it's not an ideal world. I love this genre, and I love the people in it. Some of the best friends I've ever made in my life, other than in the military, are my fellow authors. I met my wife because of what I'm doing here. I'm able to care for my children because of what I do for a living. This this beautiful genre got me through a rough childhood. It got me through prison. It got me through the military. There was always a horror novel there to distract me, to escape into. The fact that I'm allowed to give back to that, I mean, it means everything to me. So yeah, you want to come from my genre, or you want to be a bad actor and mess around and mess with the people in it, you damn right you're going to have to go up against me. Um, you know, and you will have to go up against me until I'm gone.
Yeah. Um, I do not want to take that challenge. Um, I am running down the mountain. Um, it's funny you mentioned that 2025 is going to be a good year for horror, and it is not lost on me that you are essentially kind of beginning and ending the year. You have The Rising coming out in January, February, January.
Yeah, this month,
We're still
tomorrow,
in
actually,
January.
as we're
Yeah.
recording.
Um, but then, later in the year, I think it's what, August?
Yep,
August
August 19th.
19th? There's a certain anthology that has been making the rounds that when it was announced kind of was people were pretty excited about it. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's this little thing called The End of the World as We Know It.
Mhm.
It is a anthology, the Stand anthology. Um, I could spend the rest of this podcast listing off all of the amazing authors that are in the table of contents, but I have to imagine the majority of people listening to this are aware of this anthology. So I'm going to just ask the question, how did this start? Whose idea was this? And how the heck did you get it to happen?
I mean, this started as far back as World Horror Convention San Francisco, which I think would have been around 2008, 2009, where Chris Golden, Jim Moore, and I wanted to do an anthology called Arena. And it was a mashup of all the iconic horror characters. So you would have F. Paul Wilson and Joe Lansdale write a story together where Hap and Leonard and Repairman Jack teamed up. And you would have, you know, Jim Butcher's occult detective character in Castle Rock fighting Pennywise. And it was just, and of course, we couldn't get the rights to do it. It would have been a nightmare. But then Chris and I did The Drive-In, a tribute to Joe R. Lansdale's The Drive-In anthology. And it went really well. We found out that we work really well together. And we were talking one day about The Stand and what an impact that it had on our lives. It's our favorite novel, both of us, hands down. And we were talking about how it resonates even more after COVID-19. And Chris
Mhm.
said, we should do that as a follow-up to The Drive-In. And I said, oh my God, that would be great. We should ask Steve. And he's like, yeah, we really should. And we assumed he was going to say no. So we email him and hey Steve, this is what we were talking about. This was our thought. Fully expected, you guys are sweet, but there's no way in hell I would ever let you do that. Instead, he replied within 3 minutes, and he said, "Do it," with four exclamation marks, and it was the exclamation marks that was like, "Oh wow, he's not kidding here," do it. So then we had to actually do it. Um, we split the book into four parts: stories set during the spread of Captain Trips, stories set during everyone's migration to Boulder or Vegas, stories set after the end of the novel. So you get to see the story continue after the novel ended. And then the fourth part of the book is stories that take place elsewhere. That's all I'm going to say without spoilers. Um, the hardest part, the absolute hardest part, was picking the lineup. We knew we couldn't do an open call, or the book would never get published. We'd be reading manuscripts forever. Um, we had to find people that we knew were as passionate about the stand as we were. Um, because it's a mainstream publisher, we had to, of course, deliver a certain amount of authors that, you know, they're going to absolutely need to see these folks in the book, and with good reason. But we also wanted to make sure we championed indie horror. We wanted, some up and comers, some newcomers who folks have never heard of to be in there. And we wanted all of horror's various subgenres. We wanted splatterpunk. We wanted quiet horror, grief horror, queer horror. You mentioned it. We wanted it represented in this book.
Mhm.
Um, I think we started with a list of 500 names, and then we had to keep winnowing it down and winnowing it down. But man, when we started getting the stories, I mean, just the imagination that people have. Without spoilers, Tim Lebbins takes place on the International Space Station. Imagine your astronauts trapped on the International Space Station. Half of you are dreaming about Mother Abigail, the other half are dreaming about Flag. What would that lead to? You
Oh
know,
man.
um, just all kinds of cool stuff. David J. Scow, who has one of the last two stories in the book, just did something so daring and so ballsy.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you what it is. You're gonna have to wait and read it. But just so many great stories. Wrath James White, he came back and he said, the one thing the stand never shows is what was happening in the hood. I'd really like to cover that. I'm like, go. Uh, Wayne Brady, the actor Wayne Brady and Maurice Broaddus team up to give us a Mother Abigail origin story that Steve loved. And that was for me, that was the best part. And Steve, if you're watching this, I mean no offense, but you were like a little kid on Christmas morning. As he's reading the stories, he would email Chris and I, after he'd read a story he was particularly excited about, and he was just so gleeful and so
Yeah.
happy with these stories. And it was, I like I said, he's given me a lot over the years. It was nice to be able to give back to him.
Yeah.
Uh,
I have to lightning round this just because, and it's total gossip, so you can shoot any of these questions down, but I'm gonna shoot my shot.
all right, lightning
Um,
round.
who was the biggest pain in the ass author to deal with?
There really wasn't. There genuinely wasn't.
Really?
Yeah,
Really? All right.
honestly,
I'll
because
take it.
because you want me to say Nat Cassidy is what you want me to
I was actually
do.
hoping for Ron Melfi, but I believe it.
No, Nat was cute. Nat is one of those writers, and Nat, if it makes you feel any better, uh, Jesus Gonzalez was like this too. Nat would continue to revise that story. If he could, he'd go to the bookstore, take it from people's hands before they purchase it, and write in his edits. But that was not being a pain in the ass.
Did Stephen King have to read the stories and sign off on each of the stories?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean,
Did
he signed off on the anthology as a whole.
yeah.
But he had pleasure reading them. It wasn't a chore for him. It wasn't a slog. It wasn't like, oh, I gotta go read this story today. It was, oh my God, you guys, this story.
Yeah.
You
Was
know.
there anything that was hands off? Like can't go
Um,
there, can't do that, can't
yeah,
change
we
that.
we weren't we weren't supposed to use any of the main characters. You couldn't have a story from Stu Redman's point of view. If your story took place in Boulder and your character was watching the Free Zone Committee, of course you could mention that Stu was there. But we didn't. We wanted to focus on the other people in the world.
Mhm.
But then, of course, Wayne and Maurice broke that rule, and Steve loved what they did. So, but yeah, we tried to avoid that. We stayed away from that portion of the Dark Tower saga where Roland and the Quartet show up in the world of the Stand. We didn't want to touch any of that. No giant emerald castles or any of that. We
Mhm.
wanted to stay with the novel. Um, what was interesting is there were no restrictions as far as the stories that take place after the novel.
Mhm.
It was, go for it. What do you think happened to the world?
Uh,
Um,
well, that's going to be hitting shelves August 19th, so everybody has to look out for The End of the World as we know it. And it has everybody in it. My God. But before we get there, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock, I there's a special day coming up for you and Mary, um, and it's the 1 year anniversary of Vortex
that's
Books.
right.
Happy, happy birthday, guys! This
Thank
is
you.
I, you know, if anyone was to say, you know what, I need to find a stable, like, what is going to be my bedrock for my writing career? You know what? I'm going to open up a bookstore. I my hat is off to you, and I guess I wanna ask you and kind of marry by default, like the kind of the origin of Vortex, like the idea behind it.
Have you ever been to Dark Delicacies out in Burbank?
Yeah,
Okay.
sad. It's gone.
I know. Dark Delicacies and Del and Sue, the proprietors, are part of my DNA. I say this without hyperbole or exaggeration. I would not have a career without their support and their help over the years. Going to Dark Delicacies felt like coming home for me every time. And I always wished I could live out there because it was the hub for horror
Hmm.
writers on the West Coast. You'd walk in and everybody'd be there. Um, so I wanted to fashion something very much in honor of Dark Delicacies. Uh, we wanted to keep our costs down, real estate wise and investment wise. So we wanted to keep it here in central Pennsylvania. We're 3 hours from New York City, 2 hours from Philly, 45 minutes from Baltimore, 2 hours from DC. Uh, so we knew East Coast folks, Mid-Atlantic folks would come to us like they did Dark Delicacies on the West Coast. And it has become a hub. Um, you walk in any day of the week and chances are good you'll find a writer there hanging
Hmm.
out. Not just signing, but they're shopping. We have had customers come from as far away as Taiwan, Australia. We've had quite a few folks come out from LA. We had a young man who's for his high school graduation. He asked his father if they could road trip up to Vortex because he wanted to meet Wrath James White. So they got in a car and they drove from Florida to Vortex to meet Wrath and get their books signed. Um, it's neat because Mary and I are our readers, our fans make the pilgrimage.
Yeah.
But we also get folks who have no idea who we are and but are big into horror. Um, had a lady come in and she's very much into Haley Piper and Eric LaRocca, and she couldn't believe that we had a selection of their books. And this is amazing. And she goes, "You sure have a lot of this Brian Keene guy's books." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, we have a lot of his. I haven't read them, but I've heard of them." And I didn't even tell her. I just didn't even tell her. As far as she knows, I'm
Mhm.
still just the guy that ran the store. Um,
Legacy, legacy.
but
It is.
it's nice on those months when the royalty checks are a little slow or a little low. You got the store to fall back on, and every day I get to help my friends, whether it's ordering their books or hand selling their books, or I get to help readers. My favorite thing is to when somebody walks in, they don't know what they want, and I get to help them find something they're gonna love.
Yeah. I have this fantasy of you and Mary just kind of, you know, this is where you're going to be like any day. Like it's kind of the Cheers of horror lit where you can just walk in and there you'll be. Um, and I really want to kind of pay lip service to Mary Giovanni because I think like, you know, Chills, The Hollower, so many of her books are have left their kind of impression. You want to talk legacy. I I want to my final question for the night. Maybe I'm going to ask two more, but like, do you two offer feedback to one another? Like, is there a part of the process where it's like you go swapsies with one another and
It's funny.
share?
We were just talking about this last week. Mary and I were friends for, oh gosh, I guess 13, 14 years before we ever started dating. We met when we were both starting out as writers. And for a long time, we were just friends.
Mhm.
And back then, yes, we used to read each other's stuff. We'd pre-read manuscripts for each other. We offer critique, advice. Um, Once we entered into a relationship, a romantic relationship, um, she can't read my stuff at all anymore because she says
No.
she sees the truth behind it.
No.
And I'm finding I'm starting to run into the same thing with hers. Her Alien novel is it's remarkable. If you read the a lot of the customer reviews talk about, wow, her military dialogue is really authentic. These really feel like guys that served. The reason is because it's me and my buddies from our Navy reunion. She basically sat at my
Yeah.
Navy reunion all weekend and copied how we talk and crafted these characters.
Is
Um,
is there the
so
moment where you're reading and you're like, this face hugger seems a lot like me. Like why am I like is there something you want to tell me,
I'm
Mary?
the face. That's my kink, Clay. I'm a face hugger. No,
Xenomorph king.
it's I see the hurt and the real life pain in her stuff, and she sees the hurt and the real life pain in my stuff. And when you are romantically involved with somebody, that can be tough because writing fiction, it's a form of art. We're creating art, and you want to go and give your partner a big hug after you read some of these things, you know?
Yeah. That actually, we're not going to top that. Like that's the most, like that to me feels like the thing I want to walk away with. Like I want to leave on. And I, I see the two of you, and it's a really kind of beautiful relationship. And just the kind of life that you've created with one another, the store as a hub. It's a really beautiful thing. And you mentioned legacy at the beginning, and I feel like we've kind of mapped out so many of these kind of destinations, whether they're on the page or whether they're in the world. And I just want to say I really appreciate that. You were very kind to come and chat with me for an hour, but I think of what I see you doing for the rest of the horror reader community and horror authors. Um, you're just you're not only creating your legacy, Brian. I think you're helping kind of create a larger tapestry that connects a lot of other people together. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, my friend. It's my honor. And, thank you to, I didn't do any of that alone.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody that's helped me do that over the last 30 years.
Jesus, you
The
just want to write
ones,
zombies. You just
I
you just
mean,
want to be
no,
in your
I
cabin
mean,
writing zombies.
no,
Like,
for real. The ones who are still with us and the ones who are no longer with us. To paraphrase Stephen King, I have not forgotten the face of my father. I've not forgotten the face of my friends. Um, you know, the ones who are still here and the ones who aren't anymore. We're all in this together, as Robert De Niro says in Brazil.
there you go. Brian, thank you so much for beginning 2025. I I think there's some clouds in your crystal ball, but I at least think there's going to be some great books along the way.
Absolutely.
Um, let's just get to 2026,
We'll get through it
2027.
together, folks. Just be kind to each other. It's just help each other, man. That's all you got to do. Just help each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it helps to have lighthouses, and you're a big old lighthouse, Brian.
I got, I got got a big old lighthouse right there that Mary just made me. I don't know if you can see it sitting
There
on
you
top of my
go.
humidor. So
Well, see, it all comes full circle. Um, Brian Keene, author of the upcoming, the brand new The Rising, more selected scenes from the end of the world, and co-editor along with Christopher Golden, The Stand, the end of the world as we know it. The Rising comes out January 28th, and the Stand anthology will be out August 19th.
that's right.
Everybody, thank you very much. This has been Fearmongers. Have a good night, guys.
Peace.
I told you there was going to be this huge cutoff, and then it didn't happen. I was
Alex
like
fell asleep.
warning you that this thing was going to happen, but Brian, you can click off whenever you want.
I don't know how. I don't use Zoom.